make sure of that. Well, we are here for we're in for a remarkable political year. We've just finished one in Virginia. And for those of you who are really having withdrawal pains from not being able to see those political ads, I can assure you that they're going to be back. And they're going to be back very soon. Because we were, in 2012, really in one of the states at the center of the national political debate. There were 3 states that had the highest spending in the presidential election. They were Ohio, Florida, and Virginia. Virginia, in fact, in 2008, our margin of victory for Barack Obama mirrored the nation more closely than any other state. In 2012, the national margin, Virginia wasn't the closest, but we were one of the 3 or 4 states that were closest to the national margin. So I guess what I say there is that if you didn't like the ads in 2012, they'll be back in 2016, because we are a bellwether state in that regard. The second way that we are in the middle of the political debate, and the political storm, you might say, nationally right now, is this upcoming gubernatorial race as well. Because there are only 2 states in the country that are having governor's races this year. Virginia, and does anyone know the other state? New Jersey. Now, New Jersey, I have to say, I sometimes don't admit this, is my home state. And I'm just going to tell one New Jersey story. And that is, you might remember a few years ago when they indicted the governor of Illinois, Rod Blagojevich. When he indicted him, Patrick Fitzgerald, the prosecutor out there, said Illinois was the most corrupt state in the country. People in New Jersey were furious. We thought we were number 1 in something on that. And then, in fact, we recouped the crown very shortly thereafter when on a single day, 140 elected officials and local governments in New Jersey were indicted, including 2 rabbis for selling black market body parts. Only in New Jersey, and how glad I am that I live in Virginia on this front now. But what I'd like to do is take us through where we are in Virginia politics right now, what happened in this last year, and what does this mean coming up for 2013. And I'll begin with a little bit of a story on election night. I was on television on election night, and about 7:40 or 7:45 on election night, Chesterfield County, Virginia's results came in. And I don't know what they do when you do in Chesterfield, but these results come flying in from this biggest jurisdiction very, very quickly. Sitting next to the television anchor, and it said that Mitt Romney had carried Chesterfield by a little more than 13,000 votes, and George Allen had carried Chesterfield by about 7,000 votes. And I turned to the anchor and I said, this election is over in Virginia. Barack Obama's carried Virginia, and Tim Kaine has carried Virginia. And I said that because of the fact that Chesterfield County, if Republicans are going to carry Virginia, they need to carry Chesterfield County by 25, 30,000 votes. They're not going to do it if they carry it by 13, and they're certainly not going to do it if they carry it by 7. And the story of Chesterfield County, however, is a story that election night that could be told in any number of places in Virginia. It could be told in Chesapeake, could be told in Virginia Beach, could be told in Prince William, Loudoun, Fairfax. And what the story is that if you looked at the election 12 years ago, when George Bush carried Virginia, and when George Allen won for the first time in the Senate against Chuck Robb, what you would find is that many of Virginia's major metropolitan areas, counties that at one time were Republican, shifted by 2012 to the Democrats, or like Chesterfield, which had been the county where Republicans amassed the single largest absolute vote total in terms of margin, those margins were driven down. And so what happened in those 12 years is that you saw the impact of a changing Virginia, which was not too dissimilar to what happened nationally in this election. Because what occurred was this. Anytime I spoke to my Republican friends, and I get a lot of information from Republican pollsters, what I was hearing was that there was a sense that Barack Obama in 2008 was a once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon. That tremendous mobilization that occurred because we had a remarkably charismatic figure coming up at a time when the Republican president who was departing was unpopular. And there was this general sense going into Election Day that that couldn't happen again. That mobilization that occurred of the Democratic base couldn't happen. Young people on the college campuses weren't going to come out again. I didn't think they were going to come out in the numbers they did myself. They thought the ethnic minorities that voted for Obama were less likely to come out in the same numbers. That the changing demographic was actually not what was going to happen. What was going to happen is that the anti-Obama sentiment, the independents who had shifted from Obama over to Romney, they were going to be decisive. I think Delegate Landis received, as I did about a week and a half before the election, a memo from the Republican pollster in Virginia that said Obama is toast, I think was the headline on that. That don't listen to any of these public polls, that's not going to be what happens, something different. But what occurred actually, both here in Virginia and nationally, is that that result was sort of the impact of demographic shifts that were hurting Republicans. If you looked at the voting groups, Republicans did well with a lot of the same groups they've always done well with. They did very well with rural voters. They did very well with married voters. They did very well, particularly with white voters. They did very well with religiously oriented white voters on that front. But with some other groups, they did not do so well. And those groups are examples of what was changing demographically. For example, we talked about the gender gap. Obama did a little better with women, as Democrats typically do better with women. Republicans run better with men. But who votes more often today? Women. And so what happens if Republicans run 10 points better with men and Democrats run 10 points better with women? The Democrats win now because the demographic shift is more women vote. Republicans have to narrow that. Among Latinos, nationally, Obama received 71% of the vote. Ronald Reagan used to get 50% of that. George Bush, when he ran in Texas, 50% of Latino vote. 46% when he ran nationally on that front. Asian Americans, 73% of the vote to Obama. The population that's 17% to Fairfax County now on that front. And so what happened is that there has been this shift, and this shift demographically has been benefiting Democrats. After 2008, James Carville wrote this book in which he said these demographic shifts are so important, we're going to win for the next 40 years. Then Republicans gained 62 seats in the House elections in 2010. In Carville's book you could buy for $1.99 on the remainder shelves. But he had one interesting point in that book that I thought was interesting. He said, if you took the electorate in 1968 and 2008, and you took the votes for Obama, and you just apportioned it out by whites, African Americans, Latinos, to the 1968 electorate, Obama would have lost. He said, the change is the electorate has shifted. that the electorate, the percentages, the demographic percentages have shifted, and that's what's causing this problem. And so what happened in 2012, both nationally and in Virginia, was very much that our places have shifted demographically. Chesterfield County in 2000 was 75% white. In 2010, it was 67%. By 2012, it had probably ticked down a point or two that way. So as Virginia's changed demographically, the Democrats now are very competitive at the presidential level here. And that's what we're having. We are a purple state at the presidential level with a slight tilt blue. But what's so fascinating about Virginia is we also have a second political system, you might say, that takes place in local elections, state elections, and statewide elections outside of the presidential years. Let's take a look at Virginia. House of Delegates, if you factor in all the people who are Republican or independent-leaning Republican, it is a 2-to-1 Republican state. We're 68 Republicans, 32 Democrats. If you take a look at the last statewide election, Bob McDonald, Bill Bolling, Ken Cuccinelli, they not only all won, they all won landslide elections in Virginia. Part of it was they had better candidates, the Republicans and the Democrats, I believe. But part of it was also the electorate's totally different. Presidential year, between 72 to 74% of Virginians showed up. The gubernatorial year in 2009, what was the percentage? I think it was 40.2% of people showed up. So what you have out of every 100 registered voters in Virginia, 72 to 74 of them show up the presidential year. About 35 of those 74, 34 of those 74 don't show up the next year. Totally different electorates, totally different challenges. So if you look at both parties right now in Virginia, you can see what their challenge is. The Republican challenge is they have to find a better way of doing better with the groups in Virginia that are growing. It's not a good business model to be doing your most effective work with the part of the population that's shrinking. You got to find a way to do better with the part of the population that's also growing. That's the long-term Republican challenge. The Democrats have a different challenge. They're doing pretty well in presidential years, but at the same time, a lot of people who may come out in those years aren't coming out for the Democrats in these other elections. They have to find some way of convincing presidential Democrats to participate at greater levels in other elections. That's a real challenge for the Democratic Party right now. Very, very serious one. So very, very fascinating what's going on in Virginia, because you can't say we're a Democratic state leaning blue or just a Republican state, because it depends on the election. My sense is in the House of Delegates, the Republicans are going to control it for the foreseeable future. I just don't see the Democrats in the next 2 years, 4 years, 6 years being able to get control of it. At the same time, it does appear that presidential level politics are tilting toward the blue side in Virginia, and the Republicans are going to have to find some way of being more appealing to the groups that are participating at higher levels in the presidential election. So that brings us to the election we're all looking forward to now, is 2013 and the gubernatorial election. And as everyone knows, in Virginia we have this incredible thing that's occurred since 1976 that I call the presidential curse. That every time since 76, a Democrat has won the presidency. The next year, Republicans have won the gubernatorial race. And vice versa. Every time a Republican has won the presidency, Democrat has won the gubernatorial race the next year. I told people, just not really truthfully, that I happened to see Ken Cuccinelli open the trunk of his car one day, and there was this little Obama sticker in there. And I heard him muttering, "Yes, we can. Yes, we can." We'll have to see whether that holds or not. But let's talk about where we are in this incredible gubernatorial race coming up. As I said, this is going to be at the centerpiece of politics in the nation right now, for a couple of reasons. One, there's only 2 races, and it looks like Chris Christie's pretty popular in New Jersey right now, especially after a little escapade with the president after Sandy. He's also appealing to independents and some Democrats, got a very high approval rating. So he looks like he should coast to re-election, even in a blue state. So everybody's going to look at Virginia. And what's ironic about this is the following. Typically, in the past in Virginia, we've held these elections in off years because Virginia, especially the old-time Virginia Democrats, didn't want to be connected to national politics. We wanted to have an election that would be isolated from the national environment. But the irony is that in contemporary politics, because we're the only one of 2 states holding these elections, the national media have nowhere else to go but to Virginia to try to read the tea leaves about what's going to happen the following year. Beyond that, we have 2 candidates who both have national platforms in some way, you might think. Terry McAuliffe, who I'll talk about in a moment, comes essentially out of national politics to Virginia, and Ken Cuccinelli probably has more national visibility than any Virginia Attorney General in the last 50 years in that front because of his attacks on the EPA, Obamacare, and federal overreach. So what we have and what we're watching in Virginia now is a race that's really going to be right at the center. And beyond that, it's going to be there for another reason. And that is, the Republican Party itself is having a debate about why it's losing these presidential elections. One point, the Republican Party has only won the popular vote once in the last 20 years for the presidency nationally. So one argument says, well, the Republicans aren't appealing, as I mentioned before, to these other demographic groups. Second argument says the Republicans haven't nominated the best candidates. They've nominated people who are too centrist, who are too moderate, who are too wishy-washy, who don't take principled stands. Ken Cuccinelli will be a national test case of whether Republicans win by nominating principled conservatives on that front. So it's the second way that a lot of people are really going to be focusing on this campaign. So let's talk for a moment about each candidate, their strengths and weaknesses. Terry McAuliffe comes, and he comes in with a number of strengths. Very politically savvy, extraordinary energy. Anywhere you go, you'll see him. I went to a VCU basketball game the other night. He was not only there, two rows down from me, but he adopted our yellow, black, and gold. It was in the colors there. But he's very energetic. He's very savvy with the media, and he is going to raise a ton of money. He has already raised essentially $9 million to run for governor. And that's just the start. So he, even in this struggling economic time, is likely to really raise perhaps close to record amounts for running for governor in Virginia. And as I said, and what he's going to try to do in many ways is to find a way to recalibrate and re-energize part of that Democratic base. In terms of his challenges, this is what I see as McAuliffe's biggest challenges. The first is simply his pedigree of coming from national politics into the state. That could potentially be a challenge, sort of parachuting in that way. The only person I think of who's really done this for governor has been Chuck Robb in 1977, but he didn't even come in as governor. He came in as lieutenant governor first. You might recall Robb was known best for being the Marine who married the president's daughter. Came into Virginia, but he came in at a lower level before he ran for governor. Typically in Virginia, people become governor and then chair their national party, not the other way around in this room. And then beyond that is this. We have had people who have done this, who have been people who have come in from the top, but it's usually for the Senate race. And they can run sometimes very competitively. Oliver North almost won in 1994. He was, a national figure who happened to live in the state. Jim Webb actually won the Senate in 2006 with that pedigree. But the Senate's a little different from the governorship. So that's one of McCall's big challenges, I think, is to find a way to convince Virginians that he's a Virginian first and not just a national guy who happens to live here. Secondly, because of that, he may actually not be, at least at the moment, very well known throughout Virginia. That I think insiders know him, but whether or not people on the ground know him may be a second challenge that he faces. So the Democrats, I think, don't have a very deep bench, so they're winding up with a candidate who ran in 2009, wasn't successful in getting the nomination, which worked to get it now. He's going to get that nomination. He's going to raise a lot of money. He's going to be good with the media. He's going to be clever in debates. He's going to be very tough-minded in terms of how he runs his campaign. But he faces some challenges. The Republicans, on the other side, are going to nominate the Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli. And he comes in Virginia politics in an unusual way as well. He's more of what I call almost a rock star among the Republican activist base in Virginia. Largely because of his attacks on federal overreach, Obamacare, EPA, all of this. That he has gained more prominence and visibility than anyone that I've seen recently. You might recall in 2009, supposedly there was a deal to pick the next Republican nominee. Bob McDonnell and Bill Bolling got together, said Bob McDonnell would run in 2009, Bill Bolling would run in 2013, he'd have the support of Bob McDonnell. To show you how I think powerful Cuccinelli's base is inside the Republican Party, let's look at it this way. He did not originally have the support of Bob McDonnell, and he did not originally have the support of Eric Cantor, perhaps the second most powerful Republican in Congress, and certainly the most powerful Virginia Republican in Congress, and it didn't mean a thing. Despite being opposed by McDonnell and Cantor, Cuccinelli, in some ways, convinces the Republican Party to change the method of nomination, to go have a convention instead of a primary, and compels Bill Bolling to recognize that he doesn't have a chance of winning in that situation. That shows you a little bit of the strength of Ken Cuccinelli inside the Republican base. When I'm asked who does Ken Cuccinelli remind me of Virginia, I can only think of one person. And he's a person of entirely different views in many ways, of a different party. And of a long time ago, and that's Doug Wilder. And the reason I think that is both of them could give a wit about what the party establishment thinks. And they have that position because they both carry their own constituency into the internal battles of the party. And they were both convinced that the party establishment had more to fear from them than they had from the party establishment. So Ken Cuccinelli, I think, comes with that. And ironically, he and Wilder are friends. They get along very well on that front. So my sense here is that Cuccinelli is very, very powerful inside that party. The question he has and the challenge he has is how well will he run? with the independents in Virginia? How well will he run with the moderates who could switch votes one way or the other? In some ways, he's a fascinating guy because he has positions that have been a little different than what you would normally think a politician have. He's had the Innocence Project, where he's worked very hard to acquit people, remove people out of prison who were convicted unjustly. I had a conversation with the Attorney General about this. He said, why do Republicans think, my fellow Republicans think, he said that government can't do anything right except when we put somebody in jail and then we're right 100% of the time. He said, I'm just being consistent with my position. But the way he did it was brilliant politically. With Thomas Hainsworth, he not only had him removed, but then he hired him in the AG's office. So he has quite a political touch on that front. And he's going to campaign as somebody who tells you what he thinks, even if you don't like to hear it all the time. And that's appealing to the public in some way right now. On the other hand, the Democrats, and many Democrats, think this is the guy we want to run against. We're going to paint him just like we did Mitt Romney. We're going to do the war on women. We're going to talk about all the social issues. That he's given us too much ammunition, and then at the end of the day, we're going to find a way to enhance that gender gap, to find ways of painting him as too extreme. That he's going to be too far, too extreme for Virginia. And McAuliffe is raising the money to do that right now. So that's the kind of race we have right now. Two candidates who in their own ways are very talented, each of whom have some liabilities. There was one person who said that, Terry McAuliffe may be the only Democrat that Ken Cuccinelli can beat, and Ken Cuccinelli may be the only Republican that Terry McAuliffe can beat. Whether that's the case or not, I don't know, but I think it's going to be a dramatic election. That brings us to the wild card right now, and that is Lieutenant Governor Bill Bolling. Just think about how he must feel. I got a call from Bill Bolling on 7:30 the day he was bowing out of the race. I've known Bill Bolling for a long time. He's a friend of mine. I respect him tremendously, though he usually doesn't call me at 7:30 in the morning. And so he called, and what he told me was that he was getting out of the race. He wanted to tell me about the press release, but certainly he wanted to tell me something else. And what he told me was this. He said, the last sentence of the press release says, "I intend to remain an independent voice in Virginia." And he said, "Bob, take that last sentence very seriously." And what he was instructing me, quote unquote, was that when I spoke with the press, he wanted it known that he wasn't bowing out of this race just yet. He was simply bowing out of the Republican nomination. That he was considering running as an independent, and that he was going to use the legislative session to burnish those credentials as an independent. In trying to think about running as an independent, I believe that Bill Bolling faces two big challenges before he makes his decision later this week. The first challenge is this. It is simply the practical challenge of money. Because if you're running a gubernatorial campaign in Virginia today, it's going to take $10 million minimum, I believe, or $8 million to $10 million to be effective. I've already told you McAuliffe has already raised $9. Cuccinelli's raised $2. But Susan B. Anthony, a national pro-life group, has already pledged $1.5 in addition. One of the things that if you work for a party, if you're the party's nominee, you also get millions of dollars of free labor of people who work all across Virginia on your behalf, every day, every night. Bill Bolling won't have that free labor that comes to him from the party. In fact, any Republican who vocally and visibly supports him could wind up being ostracized in their local party as well. So what Bill Bolling has to do is he has to have money. He has to have $10, $15, $20 million to run a media campaign. And especially, Virginia is an especially expensive state because the most populous area is the Washington, D.C. media market. So the question is, can Bill Bolling raise that money? And he has to make that decision, he said, by this week sometime to think about it. And then secondly, he has to have a reputation and he has to develop the credibility as this independent voice in Virginia. And the challenge for him there is for the last 4 years, he hasn't been speaking as an independent voice. He's been speaking essentially as the vice governor for Bob McDonnell. And so he's tried in the last couple of months to develop these independent positions. And he has developed some, but is it quick enough and fast enough for him to do it? So if Bill Bolling thinks about this decision, you can think about how he's feeling. First, he feels tremendously frustrated. You know, I was in line. I made the deal. I was a good soldier in 2009. Secondly, he believes this. He thinks if it's a one-on-one contest, if he was the Republican nominee and McAuliffe was the Democratic nominee, he thinks he would be a clear favorite to win. And if I was predicting that race tonight, I would predict that Bill Bolling would be the next governor. Whereas if I'm predicting McAuliffe, Cuccinelli, I have to say it's a toss-up. I don't know exactly how it's going to play out because each side has some baggage to overcome. So Bolling feels, you know, this was in my grasp, I can't do it. And I didn't get it. But can he actually get to the position where he could win as an independent? And here's what I have to say now. I don't believe so. I don't believe that despite being a good person, a solid guy, someone who's an excellent debater, someone who knows Virginia backwards and forwards, I don't think without the nomination of a party and his party, Bill Bolling can be the next governor. I think most of the polls show him running 20, 25 points behind. And even if he got in the race and gave that up a little bit, drove that up, could he win? I don't know. Question is, who would he hurt? I tend to believe the conventional wisdom on this, that at the end of the day he would draw more votes from Cuccinelli than McAuliffe. There are people who believe that a little differently, but I think that that core Democratic vote is less likely to leave McAuliffe than I think you would get some division inside the Republican vote or the independent vote that would be leaning Republican. And then finally, will he do it? A lot of people think he will, and I could be dead wrong on this, but I don't think he will. And the reason I believe that is I'm not sure the money is there. If somebody comes to you and asks you for a $1 million contribution to their campaign, and by the way, I'm 20 points down the polls, but I'll catch up. That's a tough sell to anybody. So the question is for Bill Bolling, will he get in if he doesn't think he can win? Will he get in just because he's so frustrated? That he just doesn't like what's happened to him? Does he get in to make a statement, or does he not? I tend to believe he doesn't get in, but I could be wrong on that. So that's where we are in this election. Absolutely fascinating. A couple of words before I end about the other races. The Attorney Generalship. The Democrats have not won an Attorney Generalship since 1989. That makes it that's a very important advantage that Republicans have had in Virginia in thinking about gaining the governorship. That office the Democrats haven't won since '89. Maybe it's because most people associate it with a top cop perspective, and Republicans are usually seen as stronger on just law and order issues. But that is a problem that the Democrats have. We'll have to see whether they can solve it this year. I'm not so sure it's going to be so easy for them to do that. brings me to the next election, which is lieutenant governor election, a job that has minimal responsibilities typically, but this could be the most important lieutenant governor election in our lifetime. And the reason for that is the 2020 tie in the Senate. That the tie-breaking vote is likely to be the lieutenant governor. So the Republicans just have everybody running for it. I think Steve Landis may be the only Republican not running for it. And the Democrats have Senator Ralph Northam in Northern Virginia, a person who's been Secretary of Technology, Anisha Chopra. But what this means is there's going to be more attention to this race than we've usually ever seen in Virginia, where it's often very, very difficult to get people to look at that race totally independently. So it's going to be a remarkable year. I think for sure the House of Delegates stays solidly Republican. I think we're going to have a highly competitive gubernatorial race. I think it's too early to predict, other than to say I think if Bill Bolling's in the race, I would give Terry McAuliffe, in that sense, a leg up on this race and think he would have a chance to win. So that's where we are. One final word, and that's this. As our politics have become more highly competitive, more highly partisan, one of the things that you see is that the administration of elections in every possible way now get into that debate. We've been pretty fortunate, I think, in Virginia to have the quality of work that you people perform every day in every election, that we haven't had many of the issues that have arisen up elsewhere. But what I would say is that you can be assured that as this election proceeds, everything you do will be under the same level of scrutiny as everything that happens in the political arena. Because as time goes on, there's almost nothing that doesn't get sort of put into that political mix. And it's incredibly important that you keep doing the same kind of professional job that you do in Virginia to make sure that our elections don't seem like those elections in my home state. Thank you very much.